Today's or this week's lecture is on Billy Ray Belcourt's book, A History of My Brief Body. The objectives are, in essence, to just work our way through the sections or the chapters of the book, such as an NDN, Indian Boyhood, A History of My Brief Body, Futuromania, Gay, 8 Scenes, Loneliness in the Age of Grinder, and so on. As we work through these chapters, we'll also be considering terms, definitions, and other things that he is referencing. So his first chapter is an Indian boyhood. This section or chapter is about not remembering. It's about Belcourt saying, I don't remember, and with more difficulty, I can't remember. Memory and the act of remembering is returned to throughout the book in this way. It's a theme and also an extended metaphor, I'm going to suggest, for trauma, personal and collective Indigenous trauma. It's about his struggle with body, with the perceived choice of no children. But isn't this notion, and he uses the word futurity, isn't this notion of futurity, I'm wondering, isn't it just that, just a notion? Uh, and maybe I can say that because being in a woman's body or perhaps being heterosexual, there is just an internal or an intrinsic bias of not being able to see what he means by futurity. So there's definitely that component that could be present. It's about his first experiences of sex, of touch, devoid of language. He describes that first experiences of sex as textuality of the body. It ends with being held by his father and attempts an understanding of the male body and the male body of, and this is a term that Belcourt uses in place of First Nations or the Cree Nation. He uses the term Indian as NDN. So he mentions the word subliminal, which I want to just briefly really consider. Um, Subliminal is an adjective. It is from the field of psychology and refers to a stimulus or mental process. Apparently, the idea is that it exists below the threshold of sensation or consciousness and is perceived by or affecting someone's mind without their being aware of it. So, for an example, I pulled up some of these images of Miley Cyrus from her "We Can't Stop" official music video, and it came out quite a while ago now, June 2013. Um, this was not exactly subliminal because it created quite an uproar in certainly minority scholarly readings of it, where Miley Cyrus is clearly relying upon the Black body of Americans to lend her street credibility or kind of a rougher edge or even just an edginess. At the same time, it clearly enhances her white femininity. And it suggests she can be viewed or read or identified in a different way, in a certain way. And in that way is separates her from her life of privilege, money, fame even, and all these kind of other trappings that she was certainly enmeshed in at that time, and I would suggest continues to be. So here she is trying to subliminally um, affect an audience I think I am she has indicated that she doesn't see any racist problems here at all. So it may honestly only be subliminal to Miley Cyrus. Um, I I really like the work of Billy Ray Belcourt very much. Obviously, I'm teaching it. However, I am going to say that we, and I just mean people, like the human race, I don't think that we necessarily come into being. I don't think all people are made, created because love is mathematical. I think there are many times that love has nothing to do with procreation. As Belcourt's book certainly attests, that sex can be completely devoid of love and even affection. I do think that bodies of color are often used in subliminal ways, but I also want to say that subliminal isn't it isn't as hidden as I think it once was. There are I think that we are just, and I'm just using we in a very general sense, that just people in general, viewers in general, readers in general, are a little more sophisticated than they were even 20 years ago. So that something like what Miley Cyrus does is um, is apparent, is seen. Uh, uh, Belcourt, and this is he uses the word citational. So I've given you some information. I begin with just information from Wikipedia. I don't normally like citing Wikipedia, but as you can tell, the description of citational from the Collins Dictionary was lacking. Citational is an adjective pertaining to citation, whereas from Wikipedia, there's a literary theory. They give it more meat on it, which is, I think, far more helpful. In any case, Bellecourt is citational, meaning he references other scholars and writers throughout his work, and his work is highly citational. Consider how does this, as Goodman, Tomlinson, and Richland suggest, attribute language and meaning to distinct speakers? How does this work, this citational work, connect time, join past, present, and future discourses, documents, and performance practices? Remember, Bellecourt asserts this work is his job, and that to connect history to present and to frame, create perhaps a future is, as he refers to it, his job. Um, and here again are some quotes. I'm not reading all of these because, of course, you can pause this, as you know, and read this yourself. Um, but these three quotes are about the body. Indian boys are ideas before they are bodied. Our lives are muffled by a flurry of accusations that outrun us. Ideas of this vexed sort leave a burnt path in their wake. Feet like ours are singed with a history that isn't done with us. One that is imprisoning and riotous at once, a mode of being that sucks the air out of the room, and another that is quieter but equally denigrating. And here he's talking about the two types of men. So Bellecourt suggests that being First Nation creates two types of men, and he paraphrases Judith Butler. Judith Butler is an American philosopher and gender theorist, and her work is influenced in political philosophy, ethics, and in the fields of third-wave feminism, queer, and literary theory. Like Butler, who Bellecourt references more than once, Bellecourt is also influenced by the work of Michel Foucault, who he also refers to more than once. In any event, here he suggests there are two types of Indian men. one that is imprisoning and riotous at once, a mode of being that sucks the air out of the room, and another that is quieter but equally denigrating, a slow injunction on happiness and possibility. Both beget a sense of immobility. These are ways of life at the heart of colonialism that cut along gendered lines. Butler claimed that language and styles of behavior are citational, that they echo from a history of use. Joy, then, is a politics of citation. So I'm going to assert here that there are as many different types of Indigenous men as there are Indigenous men, that there are as many different ways of responding to historical and ongoing colonialism as there are Indigenous people. I disagree with Belcourt, and this isn't going to be the first time. I think for a number of reasons. I think some of it maybe age. I see Billy Ray Belcourt as a young man because he is. You will see him, I imagine, as a contemporary, as a peer. I think he's brilliant and creative, but also I see him as a boy trying to figure out what it might mean to be a man. And we are, in essence, privy to that becoming. It has been made public, documented, and put to the page, which, as I'll indicate again in an upcoming slide, again, this is what he sees as his work, his job, as he refers to it, aside from me disagreeing with him, are, of course, all the moments. I do agree with him. Indigenous peoples are ideas before we are bodied. And I would suggest Indigenous peoples as a whole, not only Indian people, are Indian boys, as he refers to First Nations, are singed with a history that marks who First Nations people are, who Indigenous people are, that indeed perpetuates stereotypes, prejudice, and racism. And all of this is dangerous in that it costs so many Indigenous peoples their lives, quite literally. And of course, I also mean metaphorically. The image is from the Metropolitan State University of Denver's Center for Visual Art. And this was an exhibition that ran in 2013 to 2014 called Cross Currents, which presented contemporary Indigenous art. So Sheila Heti published and I believe it was her sixth book called Motherhood. She's quoted in Belcourt on page 12. Who is it for me to bring all this unfolding into being? Belcourt writes, in my vocalization of a non-normative sexual identity, they heard, meaning his family, a disavowal of futurity. So this isn't the only time he will reference Sheila Heti's book, Motherhood, but it is the first. Here we see Belcourt questions clearly, and he too references Lee Edelman's No Future. What does it mean to exist in the absence of biological procreation? Heti's book, with a narrator that appears to be based upon herself, waffles between wanting to be a mother and not wanting to be a mother. If she becomes a mother, will she write again? She indicates in the book that that her sister has 6 children and she has 6 books. And I'm paraphrasing, but actually asks what's the difference. Edelman's book, No Future, is a scholarly work scathing in its call to task the bias towards those who can make children and those who cannot. Of course, Edelman can make children, and I'm using air quotes, but his homosexuality is a banner, he asserts, to a lack of his word futurity. Belcourt asserts the same, and this is that quote on page 22 where he writes when he tells his family that he's two-spirited, that he sees this as a vocalization of a non-normative sexual identity, that they hear a disavowal of futurity, that he had, and I'm quoting, relocated permanently to a land emptied of fathers, one inhospitable to the customs of fatherhood. Much of his book, and certainly this chapter, considers memory. This is quite a long quote from page 12. Um, I'll read it in a moment, but memory is a sustained topic, theme, and a symbol throughout his book. And I would venture so far as to say within his writing up to this point, who knows what his future work will do, but certainly his three books up to this point really examine the topic, the theme, and the symbol of memory. Here in this section from page 12, he addresses memory in tandem with writing. His work, his job is to report from the scene of an undead past colliding with a still to be determined future. So really consider the wording here. Perhaps this pressurized orientation to memory, one by which we understand the past as a trace that pulsates in a body in the present, is always the case with life writing. The writer is called on by others to do the politically significant and ethically charged work of construction and then documentation. And here's where he writes, "This is my job, to report from the scene of an undead past colliding with a still to be determined future." So really consider the wording, report from the scene. Normally that phrase is finished with report from the scene of a crime. What might it mean to be in your early 20s, which is when he published all three of his current books, and feel that it is your job to report from the scene of really a crime, the crime of the institution of Canada, government, other institutions that are either directly or indirectly related to federal, provincial, or territorial, pardon me, enacted, continue to enact in the hopes, as Belcourt indicates, for a better. I suggest this based upon his return to the word joy. But this kind of work of enacting, of documenting, and he tempers this with a still to be determined future. Notice in this section, he uses a lowercase I. I think it's the only lowercase I, like as that should be a capital, the personal pronoun that I can at this moment recall. He ruminates. Maybe I am here in the way that a memory is here. And he writes, "Isn't that sad and beautiful?" That is honestly quite a beautiful and even evocative question. However, what's it mean? Okay, really consider this. What does it mean to be present in the way that a memory is present, to be here? Here is present tense. To be here the way memory is here, but memory is never present tense. Memory belongs to the past. So consider this. Maybe I'm here in the way that memory is here. He's suggesting he isn't present, that he belongs to the history of the creation, that he cannot be here. He cannot occupy the present because he is inextricably created and present in the past. And yes, to be here the way a memory would, meaning to kind of always exist in past, is very sad. Other than, and this is more on memory. There are, and he writes this clearly, there are cavernous gaps in my memory in which people I love with fortitude today, those without whom being in this world would be a taxing affair, don't exist, as though my brain has been surgically hampered. Rather than let those gaps swallow me up, I plant flowers of all sorts there, daisies and prairie crocuses, northern Alberta flowers that grow in the wild, ones that hold a firm place in my childhood psyche where bodies should be. There is no use marinating on the theory question of how and for what reasons there is a nothingness where there should be a haze of good feeling. A thick opacity is missing. Again, it isn't mine to estimate who or what was the thief in the prairie subarctic night. Perhaps I write now in the mode of autobiography to stimulate the conditions. He writes, in this way, I'm an archaeologist of the disappeared. Other than the gaping lack of logic in referring to people that he loved with fortitude being non existent, because if you don't remember them, how do you know you loved them with fortitude or anything else about them? Also, if it isn't yours to estimate who or what was the thief in the night, then whose is it? Aside from those kind of missteps in logic, again, this lack of memory, lack of making memory recurs throughout the book, despite Belcourt's assertion that perhaps he writes now as an archaeologist of the disappeared. I would suggest to you that his work appears to do the opposite. He appears to write to forget, to maintain that burial of northern Alberta wildflowers, at least up to this point. He works in a way that seems to disavow memory, to not want to uncover it. I do think that this first chapter is probably the longest. So I'm going to stop now because we're almost at, well, we're over 20 minutes. And I think that, just listening and watching PowerPoints must be so tiring for you. I'm sure everybody's very happy to know that we are going back to, as far as I'm aware, face to face in September. So I'm certain I'm not the only one who can say how I am looking so forward to that. I want to apologize for I feel like I'm communicating really, really poorly today. Some of that is I'm still sick. Um, and I do apologize. Some of that is, of course, I'm tired. I'm going into the third week of my son and I being home, my son being home with me and not in daycare. We have, I don't know if I've told you this, we have both tested negative for COVID and our self-isolation ended just Friday. So I haven't had time to go out yet, but I'm going as soon as I get this posted, I'm going to go out into the world and get a coffee, and I'm looking forward to that. Don't worry, I'll wear a mask. I know that I'm still sick, but I am negative, and I'm just going to go through it. Drive through. I'm not like going out into the world in that way. Now I feel completely guilty that I'm going to go get a coffee. Anyway, I hope this finds all of you well, and I will be posting the rest of the videos for Belcourt's book shortly, within like the rest of this week and next. All right, bye.